Hi again, everybody. Scott Hards from HobbyLink Japan here. I am the founder and chairman of this company, and that's why we call this segment Boss Builds. So, as you may know, I'm still fiddling with my Blitz by Takom Jagdtiger. It's been a lot of fun so far. We've got the whole suspension and track assembly done, as you saw in our previous episode. Now we've got all the details on the top of the hull done, and in today's episode, what we're going to be doing is bringing it all together. This is where all the major assemblies are going to come together, and perhaps the most fun part is getting to build the gun, because, you know, what's a tank kit without a big old gun, right? And we finally get to build that today, so it's really going to have the completed atmosphere, I think, ready for us by the end of the session. As you can see, the last step here, step 24, it's all going to be completed. So we're really looking forward to getting that. It's been an interesting journey so far. But before we dive in today, just a quick word. We hope that all of our viewers are, of course, staying healthy, staying safe out there. And if you're not able to, stay at home, which is the best thing to do, of course, during this pandemic, and you are out there helping provide some vital services for our society, well, you have my heartfelt thanks for that. But as far as we here at HobbyLink Japan are concerned, probably the best we can do for now, besides getting out what packages we can under the restrictions that we're currently experiencing, would be to bring you this kind of content, which may help alleviate some of the boredom for those of you who are stuck at home. So anyhow, again, our thanks for all those who aren't stuck at home, and again, our thanks for those of you who have been watching along so far. We really appreciate the support. All right, let's dive in and get this tank finished, shall we? Okay, so as you know, we've got the bottom of the tank and the top of the tank done now. And today's mission is going to be to build the gun, which gets sandwiched in between them, and then put the top on. So this is going to be an exciting step here. Before we do that, though, I want to take a look at some of the details that we finished on the top of the tank here. They're really, really nice on this kit. As you can see, I got on all the photo etch parts that we were working on last time, and some of the detail in this area of the tank is just so crazy. These little bits here, these little hoist hooks, right at the tip of my index finger there, they're like probably the tiniest parts I've ever had to work with, and they're really tough on my eyes, I gotta admit. I wish I didn't have to say that, but it's part of life. Lots of great detail on the top here with the commander's cupola and the periscopes and viewports and stuff. All of the track hooks on the side here. Now I've left the actual links, track links, off the side right now because we're going to do the painting, and just leaving those off is going to make it a bit easier, I think, to paint those. So I'm not going to have those on. Also, there's a machine gun which attaches to this rod that's sticking out of the back deck of the tank here. But the connection is really, really fragile, and I also wanted to leave that off just for safety's sake during the painting process that we have coming up. So I've left those parts off, but pretty much everything else is just going to be in place. I also didn't realize this, but the little hatches here going into this, they open up. So we've got interior detail on those as well, and so that's a lot of fun. So you can open and close those after the tank is built as well. So lots of great detail on this. I'm really, really happy with how it looks so far. And now let's get into building the gun. So it looks like pretty much all of the parts for the gun, except for the tip of the barrel or the muzzle brake, are all on the D runner. So I'm just going to get going removing those. Get an idea of just how big the gun on this thing was. It was even bigger than the 88 that was famous for being on most of the really heavy German tanks in World War II. And we're going to start by gluing the two halves of the barrel together here. And of course, make sure we keep that nice and clean. So I'll get my knife here. Now, of course, when you're cleaning the barrel, you want it to stay round. So you need to be careful that you don't, if you need to, when you're doing anything to it, that you don't take off anything that's going to make it appear not rounded. In fact, there are some people who are so sensitive about that they go ahead and they use, the turned aluminum accessory parts. A lot of companies, particularly out of Eastern Europe, will make accessory parts for tank kits like this, where the barrels are a single piece of metal, usually pretty expensive actually. But since they're an actual piece of metal, you don't need to worry about possibly getting them into a slightly off round shape when you go ahead and clean up the seam after the glue has dried. Now we're going to go ahead and glue this together now. Now one thing I'm going to point out is that when you look at or when you work with a big piece like this, if you go ahead and use the regular Tamiya cement or any kind of plastic glue cement for that matter, because you're covering such a large area at once, it can sometimes kind of start to dry before you get all the way around on both parts. And that can lessen, the strength of the bond when you're doing that. So that's another place where this thin type of cement really holds its own, because what you can do is, instead of putting the cement on the parts and then sticking the parts together, you can hold the parts together like this. And then you take the glue or cement, or whatever your preferred word is, and while you're holding the part together, you just touch the brush lightly to the seam, and the capillary action will just draw that right in. I don't know how well this is showing on camera, but even though it looks like the joint is closed here, the glue can get sucked into that seam pretty effectively. And then I just kind of hold it while I'm doing this, and you can start squeezing it together as you work past each area. Of course, you can always just take the brush and stick it between the two surfaces like this as well. So yeah, these big parts can be kind of nerve-wracking when you glue them. The wing assemblies or fuselage assemblies on aircraft kits are often extremely large gluing jobs as well. And you can use the same technique for those. Yeah, you can really see the capillary action drawing the cement into the crack rather nicely. So since the top side's already stuck, it's kind of hard to run the brush between these surfaces, but we're just going to do this. Now, some of the cement is, of course, kind of running over the surface here, but we're going to just very lightly sand things later and take that off, so you won't see it on the finished product. So don't worry too much about that. Of course, you don't want to cement in the joint here, because then your gun won't be able to move. Now, the Jagdtiger itself, one of its problems was, of course, the barrel movement was extremely limited on the actual tank, and of course it didn't have a turret. So in order to aim the Jagdtiger, for the most part, they had to turn the whole tank. As I mentioned a few videos ago, the Jagdtiger was the heaviest production tank of World War II, and it had a very weak engine for so much weight. And when they kept re-aiming the tank, the stress that it put on the gearbox would often just be too much for it, and it would break. And then the tank couldn't move, and the crew would have to abandon. Many more Jagdtigers were lost to mechanical malfunction or damage of that nature than were lost to enemy action. So this is going to be nice and tight in there, but we will be able to move the barrel a little bit after she's done. And now let's go ahead and put the muzzle brake on. That's part B17. And then we'll go ahead and glue these in position later. And they've got some nice detail here. It's probably very hard to see on the video, but they've got actual rifling on the inside of this plastic tip here, which of course would have been on the actual tank. Hope you can see that. But it's a very nice touch on the detail of the kit. Now this is going to connect with this pin here going through here, and then there's a little retainer that goes on the other side to hold it in position. That's part D11. But I think I'm going to let it dry a little bit before I go ahead on that step. Okay, before I glue this into final position, I've got my trusty 1000 grit sandpaper here, and I'm just going to very lightly sand this seam, very lightly. So we want it to look good when we paint it. Again, you don't want to stay in the same place too much and make a flat spot, because then obviously that wouldn't look real. So I'm barely taking off any material here because this sandpaper is so fine, but it will look better in the finished product as a result. As you're sanding, of course, and you make progress, you can see that the sandpaper will leave a slightly rougher finish on the surface than it started with. And so the shiny glue excesses or the flat spots are on the part, of course, you can easily see how you've gotten rid of them and measure your progress that way. 15, 20 years ago or before then, of course, plastic model kits weren't designed as much using computer technology, and were often... So let's finish up the assembly of the gun here. So you can see that I've got a little pin sticking through there. And this is going to work like a grommet on it. Now this is one of those spots where you're going to want to be very careful not to get any glue on the central pin, because although it's a very limited movement, you know, the barrel can traverse a little bit to the left and right on this kit, and of course on the actual tank. So let's see, does this just snap into position? I may not even need to glue that. I think we're in good shape without any glue on this assembly. Okay, looks like the gun is dry enough now. See, it's got the traverse going here, and of course we can still move it up and down. Looks like this is ready to go, so I'm going to go ahead and glue it in place now. And as usual, we're going to let that dry for a few minutes before we move on to the next step, which is, of course, what everyone's waiting for. Bottom meets top. Now we're just going to do a quick test fit here, because we want to identify what parts of the top of the hull are actually going to come in contact with what parts of the bottom of the hull, because that's going to determine where we put the glue. So we're taking a look here, and we can see that the top part comes over this edge on the bottom part. So that's where we're going to put the glue. If this cement is on there properly, then that's going to be plenty big enough bond to hold this top in place. Trying to do this at a pretty good pace because, as I mentioned before, you know, the glue can start to kind of dry up on you. Now you want to make sure, of course, that you don't wreck any of the detail that you've spent so much time putting on the top of the tank here while you're handling the upper part. We've got, you know, lots of these little armored covers and track link brackets and cables and things. So make sure you're careful where you put your fingers when you're doing this kind of work. And now we get to put on the front of the, well, it's not really the turret because it doesn't have a turret, but the front of the hull, or the front of the part that has the gun, and the mantlet. So we're going to go ahead and put those on. And then we've got some fenders here as well. Now this is a very visible part of the finished tank, so of course we're being careful not to, you know, wreck the shape of the piece with too much scraping. Well, the problem is that some of these tool parts that we've already attached on the deck here are kind of getting in the way of the bottom of this piece getting into its proper position. Well, I have now fiddled with this thing for almost 10 minutes off camera, and I still cannot get the part to fit in place properly because the fit is so tight. It's almost, well, too perfect on the sizing here, and it just doesn't want to go into position. So what I'm starting to do here is I've paid attention to where the final friction is taking place, and I've decided to try trimming back some of the inside thickness on this edge of the plastic right here on either side, thinking that maybe this is going to help it slide into position a little bit easier. Of course, it's okay to do it on the inside like this as long as you don't change the external height, because you're not going to be able to see this edge of the plastic after the kit is completed. So we're going to try this grand experiment here and just use my art knife to peel away some layers of plastic here in the hope that this is going to help me fit this thing in a little bit easier. I want to do it on both sides here. Of course, hindsight is 20/20, and if you're going to actually build this exact same kit, I would recommend that you do not attach the sledgehammer or the axe until after this piece is in position. Those, of course, can easily be put into position after this front armor piece is in place. But they are what's really making it hard to get the base into position. Okay, I just spent another 5 minutes or so scraping more plastic off of this piece. I scraped some off the bottom here, and also on these side panels a bit more. And I think now I've got this thing to the point where I can get it in there okay. And although the top is still got a bit of a seam going, I think if we lather it up or slather it up with some cement, that the base will get soft enough that things will go into the proper position. So now you can see that I've made some tiny little gaps here as a result of all of my trimming on this little panel here, but that should be very easy to fix in post. As they say, we can just put a very small amount of some putty there if the paint itself doesn't cover it up. So I'm not too worried about that. I think we may be in position now, so we're going to leave that there. And now it's even got a tank face on it. So only a few more bits to go. We'll put the mantlet in place. That glues right onto the two flanges there at the base of the barrel. So we'll go ahead and put that on. This should be, compared to this last guy who gave us so much trouble, this should be pretty easy. We have now the fenders, B49 and B46, so let's get right on it. Here's one fender. Let's move on to the other side because we are so close here. I want to finish this thing up and let her dry so we can move on to painting. And now we have fenders. That means we've only got 2 parts left to put on this entire tank here, folks, which is F12 and F13, these little front edges of the fenders. Been several places on this kit where there have been this flash around ejector pins, which is not something you usually see. So make sure that you cut that off so that it doesn't, if this is sticking out, the piece isn't going to be able to sit in its proper position. And this, folks, is the final piece. Not counting the little bits we have to put on after we're painting. Whew. Ta-da. Check it out. I have a tank. Ladies and gentlemen, your Blitz by Takom Jagdtiger. All assembled and ready for painting. Woohoo! Okay. Okay, so that wasn't too bad. We had a lot of extra work we needed to do around this plate here up at the front to get it to fit properly into position. Trusty art knife took care of the job. But other than that, assembly has been really, really simple. And look at that, we got a tank. I'm so happy. And I can't wait to move on to the next step, which of course is going to be painting. Now, unlike aircraft models or car models, which often require very, very careful masking and being really super precise on how you get the colors on, almost all tanks you can be really, really loose and just go nuts and have fun with. So beginning in our next episode, we're going to start taking a look at how to paint a tank model. It's a lot simpler than you might think it's going to be, so be sure to tune in and check it out.